This view that women are somehow inferior to men is not restricted to any one religious faith. Women are prevented from playing full and equal roles in many faiths, nor tragically does its influence stop at the walls of the church, the mosque, the synagogue, or temple. This discrimination, unjustifiably attributed to a higher authority, has provided a reason or excuse for the deprivation of women's equal rights across the world for centuries. The male interpretations of religious texts justify some of the most pervasive, persistent, flagrant, and damaging examples of human rights abuses. At their most repugnant, he writes, the belief that women must be subjugated to the wishes of men excuses their slavery, violence, forced prostitution, genital mutilation, and national laws that omit rape as a crime. But it also costs many millions of girls and women control of their own bodies and lives, and continues to deny them fair access to education and health, employment, and influences within their own communities. The impact of these religious beliefs touches every aspect of our lives. They help explain why in many countries boys are educated before girls, why girls are told when and whom they may marry, and why many face enormous and unacceptable risks in pregnancy and childbirth. In some Islamic nations, women are restricted in their movements, punished for permitting the exposure of an arm or an ankle, deprived of education, prohibited from driving a car or competing with men for a job. If a woman is raped, she's often most severely punished as the guilty party in the crime. It is simply self-defeating, Carter writes, for any community to discriminate against half its population. We need to challenge these self-serving and outdated attitudes and practices. So my fellow elders and I, who come from many faiths and many backgrounds and no longer need to worry about winning votes or avoiding controversy, are deeply committed to challenging injustice wherever we see it. We have recently published a statement that declares that the justification of discrimination against women and girls on the grounds of religion or tradition, as if it were prescribed by a higher authority, is unacceptable. We are calling on all leaders to challenge and change the harmful teachings and practices, no matter how ingrained, which justify discrimination against women. We ask in particular that leaders of all religions have the courage to acknowledge and emphasize the positive messages of dignity and equality that all the world's faiths share. I understand that the carefully selected verses found in Holy Scriptures to justify the superiority of men owes more to time and to place and to the determination of male leaders to hold on to their influence than to any eternal truth. And I am also familiar with vivid descriptions in the same scriptures in which women are revered as preeminent leaders. During the years of the early Christian church, for example, women served as deacons and priests, bishops and apostles and teachers and prophets. It wasn't until the 4th century that dominant Christian leaders, all men, twisted and distorted Holy Scriptures to perpetuate their ascendant positions within the religious hierarchy. The truth is that male religious leaders have had and still have an option to interpret holy teachings either to exalt or to subjugate women. They have, for their own selfish ends, overwhelmingly chosen the latter. Their continuing choice provides the foundation and the justification for much of the pervasive persecution and abuse of women throughout the world. And he concludes, this is in clear violation, not just of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but also the teachings of Jesus Christ and the Apostle Paul and Moses and the prophets and Muhammad and founders of other great religions. all of whom have called for the proper and equitable treatment of all the children of God. It is time we had the courage to challenge these views. How about that from the former president, Jimmy Carter? Now, some people aren't applauding, and they're claiming that he's no longer a real Christian. I'd say he's one of the best Christians alive today. Why? Because, like Jesus, he has thrown in his lot to benefit the least and the last. Why? Because, like Jesus, he's not afraid to challenge the religious authorities of his times. Why? Because, like Jesus, he's trying to show us a better way to live. Now, in doing so, Carter tells us that Paul, Moses, Muhammad, and others called us to equitable treatment of all of God's children. And no doubt there are verses and stories that say that, absolutely. But there are also some other troubling verses that say something else. We cannot just ignore these difficult verses because we don't like them, as if they don't exist. We need to deal with them. We can't just cherry pick the passages that speak well of women and dismiss the passages that demean women and consign them to inferior status. We cannot do this unless we want to be equally guilty of the same interpretive capriciousness as the fundamentalists. That's why we need to present a persuasive principle of interpretation. And in order to do that, we need to remember that when we're reading Scripture, there's much more than just the text. There's also the context, the subtext, and the pretext that we need to grapple with too. And in that vein, it should come as no surprise that the Scriptures that were written thousands of years ago for all the religions, major religions of the world, contain aspects that reflect the misogynist and patriarchal cultures of their times. Now, knowing that the Scriptures and traditions of the world's religions contain oppressive qualities has led some people to throw up their hands and to say, that's it, religion's the problem, and they don't want to have anything else to do with it. But the answer to bad religion is not no religion, it's good religion. And good religion must combine the sacred and the prophetic. Both. Too much religion today is focused on the metaphysical and spiritual aspects of faith. We see a lot of spiritual people and paths focusing their religious life around meditation or prayer or praise or other spiritual practices. It might include walking a labyrinth, or learning yoga, or Tai Chi. Whatever practice it is, it can lead to some incredibly transcendent, high-point experiences. But the problem with too much focus on the spiritual is that it can become an escape from the real world just like any other addiction. People who become too focused on spirituality can become aloof and asleep. Spirituality then becomes a way to adjust to a maladjusted world.